Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk podcast, where we discuss the convergence of technology, business productivity, and collaboration culture, focusing on what makes collaboration work or fail and how to improve it. I didn't think I'd be back so soon with another solo effort, but I wanted to expand on a series of articles that I wrote for my blog, which you can find at buckleyplanet.com. And then I've partnered with Smarter Consulting to provide consulting services around. In fact, you can see some similar articles of me talking about this governance framework over on the Smarter Consulting blog and content on that site. But specifically, I'd like to talk about building a comprehensive governance framework for Microsoft 365. This is something, of course, I talk about at conferences. I do have a session where I actually go through and talk about these 9 different core pieces of a governance framework. And truthfully, the framework can be used with just about any IT initiative. So much of it comes from projects spanning my 30 plus years in technology, going back to the early 1990s when I served as a business analyst and then a technical project manager charged with supporting large data center expansion and consolidation efforts and the deployment of front-end tools for this database, working with some very important internal customers at the phone company. If you remember Pacific Bell, I worked for Pacific Telesis. We were spun off into Pacific Telesis Shared Services, or PTSS, if you're into acronyms. And so originally based out of San Ramon, California, and then moved over to Pleasanton. So spent a few years there before going over to Pacific Bell Mobile Services, which we became Pacific Bell Wireless, which then became Singular. And anyway, not going to go into that background here, but I will be showing a few things on my screen for those who are watching. But for my audio only audience, you'll find the full articles at buckleyplanet.com. Just go in and search for the term governance framework. In fact, I've kind of pulled it up here. So if you just go and search for governance framework, you're going to see all the series of articles, all the latest ones that have the similar in style and color with the AI generated graphics that we all just love so much now. But so I'll come back to that, and I'll be sharing a few things that I'm doing in each of those articles and expanding on what I talk about here. So it is a 9-part governance framework. As I said, I present on this topic regularly. I do provide online and in-person advisory services for companies looking for help in this area. So if you're interested, please reach out. And again, depending on your needs, me individually, my partners at Smarter Consulting as well. So happy to help there. But this 9-part governance framework is designed really to provide a detailed yet concise breakdown of each concept while keeping the episode engaging. That's my goal here. But each section includes a description, business reasoning, benefits, and best practices. So if you're interested in reading through the entire series, it's to help you ensure that you have a structured roadmap and a clear call to action for each of the topics that I cover. So that's my goal when I write. I usually write my content structured. And so people go in and say, it's like, you're very list heavy. I said, because that's the way that I write. I outline things like, what are the various steps there? Go back through my notes. I've talked about it often, how I've been using OneNote for, 20 years now, however long it's been. Early 2000s when I started using OneNote, I think mid 2000s. Anyway, long time. For about 20 years, everything that I write captured within OneNote, and it's usually one of the places that I go and I do my own research on a topic like this. And I'll go in and search as I'm writing a new article and say, what else have I written about? What have I captured notes around? And I will find links to articles, to sessions that I sat through, took notes on, talks that I gave, like all of that content in this body that I captured, which these days, and it's something that I'm working on doing, is I'm going to build an LLM and have all of my content in there, and I'll actually be able to query and get answers back based on my own content and solely my own content. So But anyway, to get this started, this framework. So the first place that I always like to start, and working with people, going through and explaining what it means to develop a governance framework. And again, I'll show just a couple things here on screen, but it's, this is a session that I'm referring to. This article here comes up in the results there. Did a session with Come Cloud with Us, an online show, and I walked through and talked about each one. So if you're looking for a high level of each of the 9 components, that's a great place to go and start. But really from there, it's the definition and purpose. And so what are we trying to accomplish with the definition and purpose? It's really the first step in governance. You have to define why it is needed, what areas it should cover, because without a clear purpose and scope, governance efforts can be inconsistent. They can be overly restrictive, as we often see, or they can be too vague to be effective. And this is important because governance is really about helping organizations align their security, their compliance, and operational efficiencies with their business objectives. Defining its purpose, whether for regulatory compliance, data protection, operational control, whatever the standards are there, it provides a guiding principle or set of principles. Meanwhile, defining the scope ensures that governance focuses on, for example, the Microsoft 365 components like SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, your security policies, the certain bodies of content that are need to be accessible and live to most of your end users. A well-defined governance scope provides prevents policy overload. It means that you can identify what are our regulatory risks if we're not adhering to these standards, and then what are the operational efficiencies and the metrics around those things. So it ensures that organizations are governing what matters most without overcomplicating the process. So what I go through in the article here is, as you can see here, what does it mean? Why is it important? Here's the kind of the business value and drivers there. And then some best practices there. And I love going through and talking about these. Some of these things are just straight in my head, like I talk about all the time, involving key stakeholders. So engaging IT, compliance, legal, business leaders to align governance with real business needs. Go to the people that are actually using the system and the content. I'm a huge advocate for piloting. So start small, scale gradually. Don't go into a pilot, build this out on an irrelevant project or a group that it's going to be low impact for the business. As hard as it is sometimes to say this, like go out to your most important projects and apply these principles, build this around those. That's where you're really going to understand the benefits. And pilot before expanding governance across the organization, just like rolling out a new piece of software. Test it, pilot before you roll it out. And then this is something I talk about a lot too, maintaining flexibility. Business needs change over time, so governance policies should be adaptable to those new risks and regulations and technologies. As your business needs change, so should your governance perspective on things. The second piece of this, I'll get ready to show this here, is establishing roles and responsibilities. How can you go through and do the definition of scope and not carve out what the roles and responsibilities are for everybody involved with that? Without clear ownership, governance efforts will fail. So you need to establish who owns governance, and it ensures that policies are enforced, they're maintained, they're improved on a regular basis. It's an iterative process. Governance involves, of course, multiple teams. IT for security, legal for compliance. The business units each have each of their collaboration needs. They could have other customer and partner constraints on how they need to work, how they need to collaborate, what content, what data they need to retain. Without these defined roles, governance efforts lack accountability, leading to policy failures, security gaps, and inefficiencies. So thinking about some of the business value of roles and responsibilities. When roles and responsibilities are well defined, Decisions are made faster. It avoids bureaucratic slowdowns. Governance remains active with clear ownership. It's not just something that is a checklist or a binder that's shoved onto a shelf. When the stakeholders are involved and you have a regular cadence of meetings to go through and talk about changes and impacts and new requirements coming in, it keeps it fresh and alive and a living process. And also, cross-team collaboration then improves. It does help with reducing friction between departments because from a governance standpoint, from an operational efficiency standpoint, people know where to go when they have problems, when they have questions. And so it can really help with your overall change management, which I'll come to later. So again, looking over at the article. So article number 2 in the series. What does it mean? Why is this important? The business value of skipping by this pretty quick. It's not scrolling cleanly. The business value of defining roles and responsibilities, and then some of the best practices. Again, this is a bit more detailed, but you can, one, I always advocate for creating a formal governance team so that you have representatives that have decision authority in IT, security, compliance, and the business units, so that you make sure that you have all of those important perspectives covered. Use something like the RACI matrix. So it's that responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed for key governance activities. In fact, in my other podcast series, Project Failure Files, Sharon and I talk about the need for roles and responsibilities, and we talk about the RACI model and other alternative models there of how it's a great example of where this has been highly efficient is where people said, I'm not getting the notifications I need. It's like, let's go look at the chart. Oh, you were looked at as informed. We sent this to you. You received the emails, but you now need to be consulted on this. Like you have a voice in the decisions around that, not just looking at the end result of what the team is doing. And so let's change that role for this function. Do you need to have that in other areas? So that is as a project manager, I would have conversations all the time. Are you getting the information that you need? Here's where things are. And also that allowed me to kind of push back and say, look, you're not the stakeholder on this. I can give you this information, but you need to go to that person in your organization that's responsible for this. That's their vote. We can't have two people fighting it out. We have that one key point of contact there. And then we also assigning decision-making authority. So define, who approves policy changes, exceptions, and governance escalations. All those things are really critical in building on the plan. The third part of the framework is developing policies and standards. So policies and standards are really the foundation of a strong governance framework. So this is what most people think of, especially approach it from a technology standpoint. It says, what are the rules that it can put in place? What are the automations around this so we can ensure that, the content lifecycle, for example, is being managed in our information management system. It provides those clear rules and expectations for, again, in my world, working in the Microsoft world, Microsoft 365 services, how they're used. It ensures consistency across security, data management, compliance, and collaboration. Without having well-defined policies, governance efforts become inconsistent. They're difficult to enforce. Different rules are applied in different groups without thought to how it scales up into other parts of the business. Maybe that's an excellent policy. Why is the rest of the organization not following that? And so if you have that centralized governance body, you can have those discussions. You can say this policy is really only for the operations department, this is where it applies, but here's what's different elsewhere in the organization. And so that, not having that centralized governance body, not following those clearly documented policies and standards means that you're prone to security risks. There will be gaps. There will be mistakes made. So a governance framework should include standardized policies for things like, as I just mentioned, data protection. So ensuring that sensitive information is properly stored, accessed, and shared. Your security standards, so defining authentication, access control, encryption processes or practices, collaboration and sharing guidelines, so specifying who can share files with whom and under what conditions, retention and archiving policies, so managing that, again, that document life cycles to comply with legal, regulatory, and other business requirements. Organizations that operate without well-documented governance policies are at risk of data leaks and security breaches, all those things which we heard about in the news over the last couple decades. Without access and sharing rules, sensitive data can be accidentally or maliciously exposed. Most hacks that you hear about, the big things are out there, are they're not intentional. It's mistakes made because of holes in these policies. It's not somebody trying to be malicious. Those things happen more frequently than ever, and it's more dangerous for smaller companies and expensive than it is for larger companies. But most of it comes through, again, gaps in policies. Compliance violations, so failing to enforce regulatory requirements like GDPR, HIPAA, or industry-specific mandates, which can result in legal and financial consequences. I used to do that for companies. I had a couple very large clients where I went in and was looking at their IT systems and their financial systems and ran audits. And it's like I'd let them know, I said, I have to be neutral. I have this outside authority, which you hired me to do this, but I'm subject to the outside authority, and had to report my results that caused the company to be fined, which had an effect of where they were very motivated to go and clean up those policies. But if you don't know what those policies are, you don't have it documented, you're not going to know when you are uh, uh, not meeting those standards. And I'll tell you, the fines are a lot uglier when it's been going on for months or years without you knowing it. You're still going to be responsible for those things. And of course, it also helps you identify operational inefficiencies. So unclear policies lead to inconsistent file storage, duplicated work, and ineffective collaboration practices. So thinking of the business values of having these things defined, it ensures consistency. So you have these organization-wide standards. You know what are org level, our business unit level, the things that you can do at the team level. It reduces a lot of the risk so that you prevent things like unauthorized access, data loss, and compliance failures, and it improves efficiency. So users better know how to operate within that system, whatever it is. They have clearer guidelines, so it reduces confusion. It makes sure that they understand how data should be stored and handled, how it can be shared, how it can be retained, and all those things. So thinking about jumping back over, so thinking about how policies and standards, what are the standards, what are policy, why are they important here, business value, and then again the best practices. I had a few ideas here on this topic here, but just kind of a high level, some of the best practices. Aligning policies with regulatory and business requirements. Obviously, you want to develop policies that comply with industry regulations while also supporting business objectives. It's not enough to lock down a system. People have to get their work done. And so that's where you have to figure out, look, these are the constraints. How do we get our work done inside of these constraints to make sure that we align with policies and laws and things that are out there? Defining security policies for access control. So establishing policies covering multi-factor authentication to protect logins, role-based access control to ensure users only have permissions necessary for their role, and also make sure that for workflows and other more complex business activities, that you don't have that single point of failure if somebody is out sick or they leave the company and hey, no one can get into this important business system or this data. Conditional access policies that restrict access based on device, location, and risk level. So those are all things that you can go and do. And then, of course, having solid collaboration and sharing guidelines. It's not enough to tell people, hey, this is what you can't do. You need to also go through and say, hey, this is the standard way that we work. Here's what you can do. Here's how we share data internally and externally. Here's how we do our approvals. This is what's required for different sensitivity labels. Which third-party apps are approved, and here's a process. If there's something that you need to get your job done and we don't offer it there, here is the process to request to have that discussion around that. So all ways to, great best practices. There's lots more, of course, that are in the article around that. And I highly recommend, again, you go through the entire series, but I'm sure as I will repeat this line, it's like, take a look at the article for more information there. But the next area, part of the framework, is creating that change management strategy. I mean, here's something, again, another topic that I speak to a lot. I have one of my favorite talks, a keynote that I've given at conferences, where I talk about making change stick, and for change management to be effective long term, there has to be a cultural change for most organizations. It has to be something that you're intentionally going after and saying, this will be a skill set of our organization. So change management ensures that updates to governance policies, security settings, and compliance rules, they're rolled out smoothly without disrupting your business operations. Again, from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft 365, it's constantly evolving. We have now, everything is SaaS-based. It's cloud-based solutions that are out there. It's evergreen software. It's constantly being updated, which is frustrating sometimes. It's great to see the features come out. It's not so great when buttons move and bugs are introduced where something had just been fixed stuff. But organizations need a structured approach to manage when these changes happen, what that actually means. A change management strategy helps organizations to implement governance updates with minimal disruption. It helps to prepare employees for new policies through training and communication. It ensures that policy changes are properly tested before org-wide deployment. So without a structured change management approach, governance efforts fail because number one, users push back. If changes are implemented without training or awareness, employees may resist or ignore new policies. Everybody talks about the problem of shadow IT, of end users going around IT to go solve their own needs. And so much of that is because they don't have visibility. There's no transparency into the change process. A decision may have been made that, no, we can't let you have that third-party tool, and here's why. But if there's not a policy in place, if they don't understand it, it's not been clearly communicated, they just know they need to get their job done, and you're not responding to their emails. So operational disruptions are an issue. Sudden changes can impact productivity, causing workflow interruptions and frustration. So you need to prepare people for the change that's coming. And then, of course, implementing governance changes without proper risk assessment can introduce security gaps or compliance violations. This is, again, one of those things where if you have a governance body, you're talking about these changes and the potential impact, and you're piloting, you're going to get these different perspectives. And you might have like 10 different organizations, the stakeholder organizations that are there participating in this governance body. 9 out of 10 are like, yes. And the last one says, wait a second, we're having trouble in our pilot with this. It's impacting this other system for us. That's all these customizations that we built, and this rule doesn't work, and we need to do all these other things. Like, again, you may miss that if you treat everybody the same and all voices are not at the table talking about those things. So part of the change management strategy is that you know the scope of who the players are, the stakeholders. And when a change has come up, you have a process that can be very quick. We're not talking about bureaucracy. We're talking about very structured so that people know and are responsible for it. Change is coming down. I have 3 days to review, to respond, to do whatever, to get back before, hey, we're moving forward. I always say silence equals compliance. You're saying yes if you say nothing. But you have that process in place. And again, that culture around change management where people recognize the importance of providing my feedback, of going back. I've agreed by being as part of this body that this is our change management process. Here's these are our the service level agreement. like I agree to respond, but in this time. So having this so smoothly integrating changes prevents downtime and ensures operational continuity. Employees are more likely to follow governance updates if they are clearly communicated and well documented. And how you do that and push that out, depending on what those things are. Again, there's a lot of communication strategies for this kind of content. But this also, having this change management process in place, it also mitigates risks. It helps prevent security vulnerabilities and compliance issues because everybody has had visibility. Everybody has given you, hey, thumbs up, we're ready to go. So again, looking over at some of the best practices around this area. Again, the article structure here goes through what is it, the business value of it, and then best practices. Some of the things that I just wanted to highlight here. So implement a formal change request and approval process. So having like a structured PCR process, project change request, where proposed governance changes must be documented with business justifications. It has to go through security and compliance impact assessments. Again, this sounds like bureaucracy. This can be very fast. It's just ensuring that, and you might look at something, okay, hey, this is similar to the other thing. Yes, there's zero impact, moving through very quickly. But you have to be able to review these things so that, and then have these SLAs so that people, again, know that they are confident that if it has the stamp of approval from each of these layers, that, hey, we're ready to go at the enterprise level. Obviously, if you're a smaller organization, it might be 3 people that own all of those different areas. But having that change management framework means that you're still going down the list each time for each of these things, saying, does not apply, doesn't apply. Oh, no impact. Oh, potential impact. Okay, what's our risk mitigation around this if this happens? So you can at least have those conversations. It also means that approvals are happening by these key governance stakeholders before the rollout. Another area is conducting change impact assessments, again, that I mentioned earlier. So before implementing something that is, an update to the system. So how will it, answering questions, how will it affect employees, data security, business operations? Are there automation tools that will help streamline this to help simplify the transition? And are there any regulatory implications that must be considered? Another area that I really like to focus on is that, the pilot, those governance changes. Again, pilot, try these things before a full deployment. So test new governance policies or settings on a small group of users before deploying anything company-wide. So this allows organizations to get a sense of how it impacts other rules. Again, you can do this in kind of a sandboxed environment, so it's not taking down other systems if there are problems. But it can help you to identify potential issues before that broader implementation. It also allows you to collect user feedback to further refine the policies, and then to fine tune, update all of your training materials based on those real user experiences with these new policies and these new changes. So lots of benefits to having this structured approach to change management. So always, highly recommend that. Obviously, there's a lot more to that, but just to give you an idea of those things. The next piece of the framework, step 5 of 9, is implementing a communications plan and having that detailed. A governance framework is only effective when employees, leadership, and stakeholders understand and embrace it. Without a structured communication plan, governance policies can become confusing, they can be misinterpreted, or they can be most likely ignored. People will follow, not that I've ever followed this, but I'd rather be forgiven for something than have to go through the long, painful process of asking permission to do something. I get it. I've led the charge on some shadow IT efforts, but as I got more and more into governance, more and more of saying we should be having these conversations up front. But you need to have a structured communication plan. Again, you can build a template for this, and then going forward, just follow the template. It can be very quick. Say, here's how we announce things. We have it up on our dashboard. We document it. It's online in this folder, all the changes. We notify all of the stakeholders. Hey, look at these changes. This is this is what's coming up. I mean, I look at as a great example of something that's very complex, but Microsoft has their product roadmap. And so if you're, anybody can go in and follow and subscribe to the roadmap to understand, here are new things that are coming up. Here's the impact. Here's the feature impact. This is what's going on. Here's the status, all those kinds of things. So if you're doing something that complex, having a roadmap site, it could be part of the communication plan. Like, look in these places, notify the leadership, make this available out on this centralized site. We have a roadmap site. Here's what we think the impacts will be. Here's the impacted roles. Push that information out to the roles, based on the role-based access to the solution. So, but without this, of course, governance policies can be confusing. It could be people might understand the change, but not fully the impact to their own organizations. And so you might not properly enforce it. It might not then be widely adopted. Communication plans define how governance policies, updates, and incidents are shared, ensures that relevant information reaches the right people at the right times, and that also provides an escalation framework. And again, this goes back to transparency. People need to know, how do I address if I have urgent issues quickly? Like, I can't wait. There's something here. What is the escalation path? Here's the normal. Maybe it's you've got a 2 business day SLA on this, but if something is broken, it's stopped, go and do, we know this usually with like our IT team, where to call for those kinds of emergencies, like where I've got like within an hour, data has to be back, like those kinds of things. Work that out in your communication plan. A lack of communication could lead to low adoption rates. Employees, they're not going to follow things if they don't understand them. And as I said, inconsistent enforcement. So policies applied differently across teams. It creates gaps in compliance and security, especially if people move around the organization. Well, my last team, we never enforced this. That happens pretty frequently. And then without that clear escalation process, critical issues can go unnoticed, which increases your risks. So thinking about some of the business values of having this communication plan in place, it increases policy adoption and compliance because employees are more likely to follow governance policies when they know why they exist and how they work. Simple as that. It's like when we understand it, we do it. If we don't understand, it's whatever that thing that you said. Words are coming out of your mouth. I'm not listening, kind of thing. It also it gets people thinking about security. Employees become active participants in data security and governance best practices, again, when they know what the policies are and why the policies are there, and they know what the dangers are or the costs of not following those processes. There's nothing that and this sounds overly harsh, but affecting people's bonuses if they exceed a threshold of security risks and problems, gaps, whatever the things that are out there. Putting measurements in place. And again, I hate to tie those kinds of things to people's jobs in that way, but sometimes what do you have to do except go around and smack people? Wake up. We need to follow this policy. As you put this metric in place for them to achieve their bonus, they may be more responsive. And then it also means that if there's a clear escalation path, it means that you get faster response times. It ensures that governance violations or security incidents, they're addressed quickly and efficiently. It's documented. You learn from it, and you go back and you say, could we have done better? This group of people were not getting the notifications. Let's change our communication strategy. This wasn't well documented. Let's change how we document these pieces. Whatever that is, or this is all becoming too burdensome. What do we do? Okay, we're just going to blast everybody on everything. That's never the answer. That was kind of a joke there. Some of the best practices, again, looking back over at if you go over to the blog, implement communication plans. What is it? Why is it important? The business value, and then some of those best practices and some of the examples I just wanted to highlight here, just a couple here. Using multiple communication channels is so critical here. So if you are only posting the changes to a centralized, like a blog or your intranet, just somewhere one place, it's kind of like if you've noticed going and doing a search out on Google that there's all the advertisements that's around that your eyes kind of glaze over. Like I don't even see them most of the time. I just jump down to the organic results of that because it's just been too much in the way. Similar, if you don't have multiple channels as part of your overall strategy, some people do great. They take in information from reading it. Others need to have video. Others have to have it in person training. So some of the things that you might, over communication is not a mistake. Sometimes it's the right way to approach this. So if you think about like Microsoft Teams or Slack channels, so you have those real-time updates out to these groups, email newsletters summarizing key governance policies. Of course, the intranet pages and reports have live and recorded training sections to reinforce policy changes. I'm a big fan of like a weekly or twice a month or monthly lunch and learn that's required, but everybody's sitting there eating while going through and answering questions. So have different formats for sharing this kind of information, depending on your organization. Having that clear escalation process. You need to have a defined escalation framework so that you can handle non-compliance issues, so like unauthorized external file sharing, if there's a security breach or governance violation, if there's regulatory compliance updates that require immediate attention, and you need stakeholders to come around and say, what is the impact here? So having this tiered escalation model, it should identify and outline who to notify, how to escalate the issues, and then what immediate actions to take based on each of those tiers. Most support organizations, they have something in place that follows that model. And then one I always talk about, again, is fostering transparency in all governance decisions. Employees, this is kind of a Buckleyism here, but employees are more likely to follow governance policies when they understand the rationale behind them. So when people understand the process, they're more likely to follow the process. They may not agree with the decisions made, but if they understand the process and that they have a voice, a part in that process, they will be accepting of that process. And they'll understand better the rationale behind the decisions that are made, even if they disagree with it. And so I always recommend like creating a governance knowledge center where employees can access the specific governance policy documents, FAQs, or frequently asked questions on compliance requirements and standards that must be applied. Allow people to go in and do a filter view and say, my department, I'm in marketing, oh, I'm in operations support, and look at the things that are unique, that are nuanced for them, as well as those that are for the entire company. And then also have change management in those things so that people can see the change logs for all governance updates. Again, to ensure that there's transparency in this process. It's so critical to be wide open on these things. All right, 6 of 9, it is establishing monitoring and reporting mechanisms. So governance frameworks rely on real-time monitoring and data-driven reporting to ensure that there's compliance, security, efficiencies, all those things. Without continual oversight, this is why it's the governance body that's ongoing. Organizations, they risk policy violations, security breaches, inefficient resource utilization, because your business rules are constantly changing. New customers come in that throw you for a loop. They asking questions and doing things that past clients didn't have. The technology changes, the personnel changes. They come in, bring their biases, their backgrounds, all of these things. All of these factors can change the way that you look at what you're doing. Like I've walked into what I thought were very well-run organizations and clients. They've got these structure and policies, and I start asking questions, and people look at each other like, we never asked that question before, and we don't have that data. And it's like you're continually optimizing the system. I'm a W. Edwards Deming guy. Optimize the system. It's a constant, continual process. That's that continual, that process of continual change, the Kaizen moment in the organization. You're constantly updating that. So you have to have monitoring tools that track who's accessing what data, how policies are being followed, whether security measures are effective or not. Um, and then they translate that monitoring data back into actionable insights, helping the organization identify trends, detecting risks, and optimizing these policies. Where you can see, because funny thing that happens when people understand how they're being measured, they tend to change their behavior to optimize themselves against those measurements. And so you need to constantly look at those metrics, and I wouldn't say they're trying to be subversive by changing or getting around skirting these policies. Again, people are like trying to get their jobs done are like water running down a hill. You put a rock in front of them, the water just goes around the rock. And so you can't blame them for being this. Human nature is to optimize their performance against those metrics, but you need to be constantly looking at and the trends and see that are people, I wouldn't say gaming is not the right word, but are people doing too much to get around that policy, and that policy is no longer giving us the results, the data. We need to tune that. Again, ongoing. Um, Governance policies are only effective if they are uh, updated, if they are true to form, meeting the need, and also that they are being enforced. So monitoring provides visibility into the compliance, the adherence to those policies, any potential security risks that you're seeing, usage trends, so you can start to see behavior if people are modeling and trying to go after and perform better against some of those metrics. You can see those patterns, so you can start detecting vulnerabilities and that might go otherwise undetected, which could lead to increased cyber threats. Um, Compliance failures can result in hefty fines and legal consequences. Resources can be mismanaged. Costs might overrun. Um, Maybe you have underutilized licensed or redundant storage, kind of all these different things which can drive up the costs. So thinking about the business value of monitoring and reporting, it again ensures compliance so that you are verifying that people are adhering. We're holding to our data privacy standards, regulatory standards, kind of all those things. It also helps to improve your security posture. So it detects those unauthorized data access, external file sharing, and potential insider threats before they happen. You can now, especially in the era of AI, start identifying. I see these behaviors. The last time these things happened, it was because of an insider threat where somebody was getting ready to quit. They were downloading massive amounts of intellectual property to their personal system or to an external drive. We need to go halt this behavior, stop it, go have a conversation with this individual, see what's going on, because it's not normal behavior what we're seeing them go and do. It also helps you to optimize your IT resource allocation. So unused licenses, storage inefficiencies, redundant services, so you can reduce that operational costs. Obviously, you only want to be paying for the things that you're using and the people that are actually productive in the system. If you get to that point with, and I've seen this in project teams where we go and roll something else now, and there might be 20 of us working on this project, and we get to the end of it, we only need 5 of us for ongoing operations of that thing. And so sometimes that means project personnel. It's why a lot of contractors are used, consultants are brought in, because it's not a long term, but it's just think of that. You're constantly looking, where can we reduce the costs so that we can go and focus on the next things where there's higher expense associated with that. So looking at, again, the best practices for this, back over to the blog here. Why are we reporting? Why are they important? What's the business value? And then getting into some of the best practices. So some of the things that I highlighted around monitoring reporting, is setting up governance dashboards. Of course, I think that is, policy compliance rates, security incidents, tracking all of those things. And it's really about identifying areas where governance policies are being ignored or misunderstood. So you can, again, I look at it from an optimist, like, people are trying to do their jobs. And so going in, is this like more education and training needed, or is somebody trying to subvert the process? Having regular audits and compliance checks. And sometimes it's best to bring in an outside body, an expert, to come in and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. But having those periodic internal audits help compare, real world activities against documented governance policies. It can be a great way to identify gaps in security protocols or compliance enforcement. And it's very important for folks preparing you for external regulatory audits. So thinking of GDPR, HIPAA, ISO 27001, for example. So those standards which rely on the level of documentation reporting that you're doing. And there's a lot that, of course, you could do around automating governance reports. It's a great area. Everybody's looking at automations. So that's, weekly or monthly governance compliance reports for leadership, sending alerts in real time when governance violations occur. So sending not just an error, hey, go have a conversation with the person, but giving the context for that, what they're trying to do. You can even automate, as I mentioned previously, somebody's doing a behavior that looks risky or looks like they're doing something non-standard, might be okay, but the system can automatically lock down, claw back something that they might have just done, or lock them out of that temporarily. And then, you can go and have a conversation. Hey, this is legit or not. I mean, I think of it like, going now with the self-serve checkout at a grocery store. And occasionally you try to do something, or, the cameras are so good now, if you're scanning multiple items and you've got 7, but only scan 6, like, it'll catch it. And folks, I wasn't trying to do something illegal. It was, the smaller item. But anyway, just using an example. No, it was my cousin. It wasn't me anyway. But having those kinds of insights, again, help you identify areas where there are potentially risks and things that you can do to improve that. And so, of course, there's more, lots of cool things you can do around AI and machine learning for threat detection and, detecting anomalous user behavior, risky file movements, and kind of those other things using AI-driven analysis. So it's a really cool area. Things that like Microsoft Defender and Cloud Apps and Azure Sentinel that go in and do a lot of this kind of thing that you can customize for the needs of your business. So love that kind of stuff. Boy, that sure would have made my life easy back in the day when I was doing a lot of this stuff, where we didn't have the tools, we didn't have the visibility that we do now. All right, 7 of 9, a regular review and continuous improvement. This is something that I find myself as a broken record talking about this, that, governance is not a checklist. It's not a binder that we do these things and then, hey, we're governed, we're done. Like, no, it's not a one-time implementation. It's an ongoing process. You have to review it, refine it, adjust it on a regular basis. It's a living, breathing thing. Business needs evolve, regulatory requirements change, technology continuously improves. Again, I'm being optimistic there. So governance frameworks, they have to adapt. So you have to have regular reviews. You're already looking at your system from the usage of how people are in the system, but you also need to, on a regular basis, and I would say like on a quarterly minimum basis, looking at the overall framework and how can we optimize the framework itself, not just what we're doing with the framework in and around our systems. Look at your policies, because policies can become outdated, your changes that happen. And so that you are in looking at like all the documentation, everything that needs to be done. I mean, this really reminds me of back in the 30 years ago, where I started started off as a tech writer and business analyst, and we started using software configuration management tools that were with the branching and labeling to track our documentation. So instead of tracking code that's being developed and branched off by different engineers, it was our documentation. And the brilliant thing about using the documentation this way, and for folks that, if you remember Rational Software and Rational ClearCase, which is their configuration management software, they also had ClearQuest, which was their documentation. I actually co-authored the book on ClearQuest, and so kind of goes back to that era. But we were using it for these complex documentation, and we knew that when there was a change in this module and this node here, the impacts in the tree, we knew where to go and make the necessary changes so that everything was updated across the board. But without something like that in place, without those regular reviews, you risk governance policies being outdated and ineffective, or too rigid to support. So it's something that you need to be constantly looking at. And regular reviews allow organizations to identify those weaknesses, address the gaps, align policies with business growth, security risks, and any regulatory changes. It also allows you to be more responsive to user feedback and the data, the real-time data that you're getting out of their usage patterns, so you can see, valuable insights into which policies are actually working, which need adjustments. And so the business value, it means that you keep up with the evolving. It's easier to keep up with GDPR, HIPAA, other industry regulations, preventing legal and financial penalties. Your operational efficiencies then improve with those processes, but it also enhances your security based on, again, those real world risk assessments, so that you're not being caught off guard by people doing the same old no good things in a different way that your current policies weren't catching, because you're constantly evolving those things against those emerging cyber threats and minimizing as best you can those vulnerabilities. So thinking about some of the best practices, back over to the blog post here, but some of the things I just want to highlight. So we've got, of course, the regular review, the why we do it, the business value of those things, and then some of the best practices that I just want to highlight here. Scheduling governance reviews on a recurring basis. So I say quarterly, assess the effectiveness of your policies and identify gaps in your processes and other inefficiencies, and involve key stakeholders from IT, compliance, security, and the business units to ensure that there's alignment with any changes that you see. Incorporate the user feedback into that. Employees interact with governance policies daily, so of course their input is crucial. You want surveys, focus groups, regular governance Q&A sessions. I have articles, I do sessions talking about effective feedback loops. I don't think organizations do enough to farm the rich data about what's actually happening with their customers, with their partners internally out of this support data. We're not listening enough to the voices of our end users, as well as the data from their usage patterns, to go and do things. If you want a competitive advantage, go in and start mining that data for rich insights into, improving your products and services and improving your user experience. Happy employees tend to mean happy customers as well. So incorporating all that feedback in, it's part of that continual improvement. Document and communicate changes clearly. Again, we're back to the communication plan, but as part of this overall framework, every policy adjustment or governance update should be clearly documented and communicated to stakeholders and employees, ensuring that all governance changes are understood, accepted, and properly enforced. All right, two more, folks. So jumping over, so talking about now, and I had already scrolled down, was reading something. So risk management and contingency planning. Now, obviously, there's a lot of overlap between these, but there's a going in with a deeper focus in each one of these topics. So risk management and contingency planning are about proactively identifying threats and ensuring the organization is prepared for emergencies. remember in a project that I was working on, I was talking with a director that said I had identified like 3 or 4 really big risks and had a whole plan of action around that. And she's like, it's like, why are you spending so much on this detail? Like, there's a low chance of this. I said, because what's now a 15 to 20% chance that this could happen as we move further along, like that might be a 60% chance. Like, I want you to know what the contingency plan looks like based on our understanding. And I hope that that goes down, it's reduced, and then it becomes zero, and I stop reporting on that. But, as we're talking about these potential risks, this one's at 80%, this one's at 50%, this one's at 20%, the plan, the next steps with each of these things. But it was part of the conversation. So governance isn't just about preventing problems, it's about knowing how to respond when issues arise. So this includes planning for, you never want to plan for data breaches, but data breaches is top of the list, compliance violations, system failures, and other potential risks. Like, this goes back to the phone company where we actually went through and did like part of our emergency preparation. We went through scenarios where some of this stuff happens. So we know, like, who do we go to? What's the process? What documentation, what information is necessary there? So it became, we were better prepared. I wouldn't say it was quite second nature. Maybe you do that with your family, your kids at home, on what if there's an emergency and here's how we react. If there's an earthquake, how we get out of the house. I grew up in California, so earthquakes, a tornado, whatever those natural disasters are, here's how we react. This is similar to that. We have a plan. We know where to go. Where's our safe place? Where's the secure room? Where's the food for 7 days? So you're planning for those things, because without a strong risk management plan, an organization then is left vulnerable to cyber threats. You may have identified it and say, hey, this is going on. We shut it down. What's our next steps? We've lost 6 hours of data, 3 hours of data. How do we get that back? How do we get back online? How do we do these different things? You'll be more, your organization is left vulnerable to cyber threats, operational failures, and regulatory penalties. So that contingency planning, risk planning, ensures that when disruptions occur, business continuity is maintained. So it's not just about like, hey, we only lost like at max 2 hours of data. That's great. You lost 2 hours of data, but then how many days are you down until you get back to where you left off? That, part of that business continuity is that, hey, within 2 hours, we're back online. We've lost 2 hours of data, but that's it. But we're back doing business. So what is that plan? So looking at data loss, security breaches, non-compliance issues, keeping them from turning into major business disasters. So some of the business value of having that contingency planning, of course, it reduces your financial and legal risk. It helps prevent breaches, legal fines, compliance violations before they occur. It helps you to maintain that continuity. So having a solid disaster recovery plan ensures that critical business operations continue even during security incidents or system failures. Like my next door neighbor in my last house, our power was out one time for 7 days. It came back Christmas Eve in the middle of winter. Theirs was out for seconds because they had the backup power unit that automatically switched on. They were prepared for that common annual occurrence that we never were. Had to manually go start our generator to make sure that food and stuff was still not spoiling. But it means that you can quickly recover from those things. It also protects your organizational reputation. So avoiding data leaks, regulatory violations, and cyber attacks, it maintains customer and partner trust as well. And so this should be something, again, it should be a strength of your organization, that like talking with potential partners or investors saying, we're backed up, we're prepared for this. This is what we have. This is how we're prepared. So some of those, again, back over to the blog post here for this one. So walking through kind of everything that I've talked about, but in more detail, looking at some of the best practices here, conducting regular risk assessments. Do you see a pattern here? of the governance bodies getting together, doing all these things for the business, at least quarterly. My suggested quarterly, you're looking at the process itself, you're continually improving that, but you're also going through and conducting regular risk assessments on every project and initiative, the things that are out there, because organizations need to be proactive in identifying potential threats, doing risk assessments. Maybe it's on a quarterly or a biannual basis. So using things like in the Microsoft 365 world, like Purview Compliance Manager, Defender, Security Center, whatever they've renamed products these days, but to analyze your security posture and identify those vulnerabilities so that you know where to go and look and where to put your contingency plans in place. But develop and document those mitigation plans, formalize those. If you identify potential risks, develop mitigation strategies, it helps reduce the likelihood or the impact of a security breach or data leak or whatever those things are. It should be detailed and outline corrective actions, escalation procedures, risk acceptance thresholds for different types of incidents. So depending on what it's on. And then, of course, having that disaster recovery, that incident response plan, so that you know what immediate actions need to take place in the case of a breach or compliance failure, the roles and responsibilities, going back to the beginning here, all of that defined so you know who owns it, what they're responsible for, what they need to go and do. Communication plans across the board, like here's the breach that we had. This is, and I've been in some organizations where they've done a brilliant job of this, where there have been problems, the system was down, communication instantly went out, and to phones, to dashboards, all those things. Like, here's what happened. Here's the steps that we're doing. Hang on for this. It should impact these people, this group. This one's already back online. Again, have that strategy in place. That helps people understand. Here's the recovery steps. This is the impact to my day. Like back when I was working for Microsoft, there was one point where there was an incident. It was not a data breach thing. It was a system failure thing where after a certain amount of time, we were just told, everybody just go home. We're down here, work from home, take your laptop, go work from home, in the pre-work from home era. So it was kind of a big deal. But all those kinds of things, of course, you need to go in and test and update those plans on a regular basis. Like everything, like you can't just have like food storage in case there's a famine. And we put it out there. How old is that food storage? I don't know. That was like 12 years ago that we put it out there. Not likely that food storage can be good. You have to constantly refresh that. So figure out the cadence for refreshing that. And I'm just going to jump right over in this view here, but to the last one, because I think we're ready. This has gone longer than I thought, but fostering engagement and building a culture of compliance. I mean, this is something that I talk about all the time in this series, in this podcast, is around the cultural aspect of all of those things. Governance is most effective when it becomes part of an organization's culture rather than just a set of rules enforced from the top down. It doesn't work that way. A strong governance culture, it ensures that compliance is not seen as an inconvenience, but as an enabler of secure, efficient, and effective collaboration. Employees should understand why governance matters, how it benefits them, and how they can actively contribute to maintaining it. So it really lends itself to ensuring long-term adoption. It reduces resistance to governance initiatives. It helps people better understand when they need something, features, new tools, all those kinds of things. They need automation, things that are out there. They understand that, okay, I've provided it in, the IT team has taken my ticket in. I understand it's a 72-hour response time before they can come back. They have to figure out who can do it, or they may respond right away within 2 hours and say, hey, we have it logged. It's already in our roadmap. We should have it by the end of the month. This feature, again, it's about communication, transparency, all of those pieces. It's part of that culture of governance. When people understand the process, they trust the process and they follow the process. So some of the business value here. So I went in and like it encourages adoptions, reduces resistance. builds trust. And if you ignore this, then you might have lower compliance rates, just total employee frustration by those things. And you're going to miss a lot of opportunities for people to better collaborate. I mean, that's a big deal. So some of my best practices that I always like to talk about, um, clearly communicating, explain to people why they need to know why we're doing these policies, and how governance supports security, collaboration, and compliance, rather than just enforcing rules without context. Maybe incentivize your compliance. I mean, I like this. Some organizations that are very gamification focused, encourage employees to follow best practices. Maybe create an employee recognition program awarding individuals or teams who actively contribute to security and compliance efforts. I hate to say like the whole like find a bug. There's always the concern that if we're awarding people, rewarding financially or otherwise to identify bugs, are they the same people that are creating the bugs? Yeah, so you've got to look at that. Again, I'm not saying that people are bad in doing these things. It's just when people understand how they're being measured, they're going to optimize against that metric. So, and then of course, training people on as part of the onboarding day one around the company culture. They should get that governance training so they know, look, this is how we do projects. This is how we maintain our systems. We are a governance centric organization. It's part of our culture. And then have those feedback loops in place. I mean, all of these different things are going to help you ultimately to succeed with the success of your governance strategy. I mean, my final kind of call to action around this. See, again, you take a look at the detailed blog post around this. I go into great detail there. I've really tried to provide in this episode of the CollabTalk podcast a high level overview. I know it doesn't feel like high level. We got down in the weeds in places, but of the 9 essential governance framework components. For a deeper dive, including detailed implementation steps, so go take a look at my blog post, buckleyplanet.com. If you saw the search results, if you just search on governance framework, there were 67 results. I've been writing about this blog is 21 years old. I've been writing about governance most of that 21 years because it's something that I was doing back into the mid 90s where I owned the governance body for this IT body that I worked in. So you can find a lot of those implementation steps out on the blog. If you have questions, you want to get in touch, I'm happy to do like a free 30-minute consultation, talk about some of the issues that you're going through, make some suggestions that are there. You'll find, of course, expanded insights, some real world examples, and practical guidance that will help your organization, hopefully, help your organization get some of that practical guidance to develop a scalable, effective governance framework. Just remember, I've said it a few times. I'm going to say it one more time. Governance is not just about control. It's about enabling your organization to operate securely, efficiently, and in compliance with the evolving industry standards. By following the principles, this is what I'm really trying to get across here. You'll build a governance strategy that supports both the business growth and as well as your broader digital transformation needs. I always tell customers, partners, digital transformation is not about just upgrading to the latest version of the software. It's getting the most out of the technology that you have, leveraging, of course, the advances. Of course, that's part of that. But getting the most, are you the most optimized and efficient with what you already have before you go spending money on new technology, new features, and still ignore a bunch of those other things that you're not yet fully using? So to get started, visit the blog posts, assess your current governance maturity, take action today. Of course, if you know you need help, drop me a line. Of course, I point people over to Smarter Consulting at smarter-consulting.com and the governance tab there. So I work with Smarter Consulting around this. So if you're looking for help, then again, they do a free consultation as well, where they can do a much deeper dive into your systems, talk technology as well as part of that. But with that, we'll be back next week with another episode. I've got they already in the can. I've got 2 more interviews lined up. I've got 2 guest interviews coming up the next 2 weeks. So don't miss this. It's going to be great. Keep following. And hopefully if you haven't already, please subscribe. There's the newsletter on the blog. There's also follow on the YouTube channel. Go out and subscribe there. Great content. This is new episodes every Thursday of the CollabTalk podcast, as well as lots of other content. I'm probably publishing 3 videos a week or more sometimes. So there's a lot to follow. But stay in touch. Reach out if you have any questions. Thanks a lot for watching. You've been listening to the CollabTalk podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.